Good morning, everyone. My name's Hazel Norman. I'm the Executive Director of the BES. I'd like to welcome you to the Best Ecological Conference of 2016. Sue Hartley, our President, is going to say a few words about the BES and some of the delights that we've got in store for you over the next 3 days.
Thank you, Hazel. Welcome, everyone. And what better way to banish any post-Brexit, post-Trump, post-everything blues than our fun-packed, exciting science programme. So I'd like to welcome you to Liverpool. This is our biggest ever meeting with 1,200 delegates registered. So it's going to be a fantastic occasion. So I'm just going to pull out a few highlights from our Fun Pack programme. First of all, don't forget to tweet using the hashtag #BES2016. So you'll need to use Twitter if you want to ask a question in the plenary sessions, and it'll help you keep up to date with all that's going on, and you'll also see pictures of who's wearing the simply most hideous Christmas jersey. So we've worked hard to make sure, as well as lots of exciting science, you've got lots of networking opportunities, chances to meet people and start collaborations. We've also got a programme of careers development. So we had an excellent workshop yesterday for our early career scientists, kicked off with a fantastic talk from, myself. And we've got a series of webinars as well that we ran at the end of November. And we're not neglecting people who are a little bit further on in their careers. We've got a mid-career grant writing retreat coming up, so check the website for that. It's the 1st and 3rd of March. I think I might just be a tad old for a mid-career grant writing workshop, but I'm sure it'll be an excellent opportunity. So 2016 is the 30th anniversary of functional ecology. So they're holding a thematic topic to celebrate that. And there's also a competition to win an iPad mini as well that they're running. So do take time to find out about their 30th anniversary. We've got lots of special interest groups happening. Full details in the printed programme, but it's a great way to network with people that are interested in your area of science. There are some tickets available for the Science Slam. That's this evening. Or is it this evening? I don't know. Well, anyway, there are some tickets available. And it's a night of comedy and science, apparently. They're not talking about my latest research paper, but it's a great occasion, lots of fun. So do pick up a ticket from the information desk. We're going to be presenting some awards for 2016. So it's an opportunity to celebrate excellence in our field. We're going to do that at the start of the gala dinner. So do look out for the posters, which are celebrating the winners' achievements as well. And there's also the winning entries to our photographic competition as well around the venue. So this year we've started a few new initiatives. One of them is the appointment of our first fundraising and development manager, Paul Bauer. Now there's an article about his work in the December issue of the Bulletin, which lays out our plans for fundraising, and we're appealing to members and the wider ecological community to donate to initiatives designed to give ecologists, particularly students and early career ecologists, more support. So we're going to be looking for donations for a variety of things, including additional funding to support the entry of younger and early career people into ecology, to support links in Africa and ecological research there, and to support PhD level ecologists as they move into the next stage of their career. We're going to have be developing one of Paul's first things is to develop a wills and legacies strategy. So we've benefited a lot in the past from legacies. So We've got a little brochure about remembering ecology in your will, so you can pick up a leaflet and talk to Paul for more details. Now, Paul's going to be either on the BES stand or he will be at a breakfast meeting from 8 o'clock on Tuesday in room 14. So Paul is inviting you for breakfast then, although remembering his focus on wills and legacies, you might want to give the Danish pastries a bit of a wide berth. So now we've done the two certainties in life, death and taxes, on to other highlights over the last 12 months. We've done a bit of a rebrand of the Society, and that's very obvious in our programme and in our new brochures and activities. We've started a lot of work on equality and diversity. So we've got a working group on that, so we're very interested in your ideas how to make our society as inclusive as possible. We've continued to run our BES summer school to invite some of the biology undergraduates to start to learn more about ecological careers. Some of our SIGs are 60 years old, incredibly. The Ecological Genetics Group is celebrating 60 years. We won a silver medal for our stand at the Royal Horticultural Society Chelsea. Our stand was called Animal Attractions. It was about pollinators, in case you're wondering exactly what the attraction was. And we also had a very exciting symposium with the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, making a difference in conservation. And we have, of course, been focusing a lot on policy. We gave oral evidence at the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee into the future of the UK natural environment following the Brexit decision. And we also had a joint meeting with a number of other societies on making Brexit work for ecology and conservation science. We have a workshop on that today. And all that led to a meeting with the Minister for exiting the European Union a couple of weeks ago. A very interesting meeting that featured endless supplies of cake. No matter how much we ate, there was still plenty left. But of course, we do have a serious business of ensuring that our message of excellent ecological science, underpinned by international outlook and international expertise, is heard. And given that, I think it's really timely that our next annual meeting will be in Ghent, so 11th to the 14th of December 2017 in Ghent, in Belgium, joint with our ecological sister societies in Germany, Austria and Switzerland, and with the Flemish Ecological Society. So we are continuing, despite some political turmoil, to have an international outlook and to engage with our sister societies. And of course, 2017 is also the year of Intercol. So we are very much part of our international community. So ecology is a science that crosses borders, and we're very much as a society supporting that. So the last thing I want to do, probably the most important, and that is to say a number of thank yous. Much of the work of the BES is done by volunteers. The associate editors, the SIG secretaries, committees, grant review colleges, policy volunteers, lots of people who've organised meetings. So it's a huge thank you, to all our members, for all the work you do for the Society. And specifically for this meeting, over the next 3 days, we have 562 talks, 246 posters, and 72 sessions. So many thanks to everyone who's contributing to this fantastic programme of science. And a lot of people have worked very hard to make this a very exciting and excellent annual meeting. So I particularly like to mention Zoe Davis, Emma Sayer, Amelia Simpson, Amy Everett, and Richard English, who've made this meeting possible. And a very big thank you as well, of course, to our CEO, Hazel Norman. And Hazel is 21 today, in that she has worked for the Society as our Chief Exec for 21 years. So wonderful to be working with Hazel. She's such an asset to the Society. So many thanks to her and to all of the people who've made this meeting a success. And finally, it's 150 years since Ernst Haeckel, the German biologist, first coined the term ecology. So Mike Begon's going to talk to us about that in a moment, but hopefully everyone at the Welcome Mixer enjoyed the celebratory cake. Cake seems to be a bit of a theme these days. But that's enough from me. I'm going to now introduce Mike Begon, who's going to welcome us to Liverpool and to tell us a little bit about 150 years in ecology. I don't think he's quite been in ecology for 150 years, but the very first ecological BS meeting that I went to was in Aberystwyth, and I was doing my PhD in York, and myself and Joy Bergelson, who's now head of department in Chicago, was also doing her master's. We got on the train and we sat next to Mike Begon, and we were like a couple of schoolgirls. We were like, "Ooh, that's Mike Begon. Mike Begon, ecology. You know, you wrote the book, Ecology. Begon, Townsend, and I was, ooh." And we were very excited to be in the presence of somebody who has trained so many ecologists. And the thing I remember most was that he was so kind to us and so nice. So many years later, as I say, Joy's head of department, I'm president, Mike Begon is still a very nice guy and has trained, as I said, so many of us in this room have benefited from his textbooks, from his wise and excellent science. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Mike Begon to tell us about 150 years in ecology. Thank you, Mike.
If I could just translate that last bit, what she meant was, after all this time, Mike Begon's still around. Welcome everybody, welcome to Liverpool, or welcome back, I should say. It's 32 years since the BES was last here, too long. Sadly, for some of us, it does seem like only yesterday, but there we are. You've heard all about the football teams and the Beatles, the two cathedrals, the many things that are going on here in Liverpool. You may not know on this slide here that Liverpool boasts the theatre that won the UK's Premier Architecture Award in 2014, and a street in Toxteth that won the Turner Prize, the UK's Premier Art Award last year. So I'm sure you'll find plenty to do and enjoy here. Welcome as well from the University of Liverpool. There you can see evidence, one of the original red brick universities in the UK. And welcome too from our sister universities, Liverpool John Moores and Liverpool Hope. I'm sure this is going to be a fantastic meeting and everybody's going to have a great time. However, as Sue has said, I'm not here really to just bang on about Liverpool, though I could, but to acknowledge this being the 150th anniversary of the coining of the word ecology. I'm going to make no attempt really to give you a definitive or an exhaustive survey of the way in which the term has developed. I will try, wherever possible, to put some local angle on the kinds of things that I'm saying. And then at the end, my intention is to be provocative, for the sake of being provocative. This is Liverpool, after all. So, here's my first local allusion, almost local anyway. There, some of you will recognize is Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodgson, who comes from the near Liverpool village of Daresbury came from, just the other side of the Runcorn Bridge. And there, in the words of Humpty Dumpty and of Alice, is pretty much the line I'm going to take here. I'm not in search of the true meaning of the word ecology. I'm going to try and acknowledge that the meaning of ecology has changed over the years as we have needed it to mean something else. And I'll try and say something about its changing meaning, and I don't think there's anything wrong with words changing their meaning as they go along. So, this is where it all began. There's Ernst Haeckel languishing there on the left. And 150 years ago, in his Generelle Morphologie, he did a number of things. It wasn't mostly about ecology. It was inspired, as you can see there on the frontispiece, by Darwin. But he set about some kind of classification of the biological sciences, and in doing so had something to say about what he called ecology. And he pretty much set the scene by the two threads of a definition that we've come to live with subsequently. On the one hand is this first definition, which is perhaps the more usual and more famous one. It's kind of a definition set up in opposition to physiology, with ecology being the science of the organism in relation to the outside world, as opposed to physiology being its internal relations. But he also talks there about the economy of nature, and it might be better, I would say, to think of this as the economics of nature. Ecology being a study of nature's balance sheets, of the gains and losses, whether it's numbers or communities or nutrients or energy. And he set the scene in these two ways, and it didn't really take off. The term wasn't used terribly much. It was a bit of a slow burner over the next 50 years, but gradually more and more people took up the term to mean the kinds of things that he intended. And that takes us to the period around about the 50th anniversary of the term, and things, well, in the mind at least of the first guy there, Henley Chandler Cowles, it's a bit difficult. Normally, you have the screen in front of you, you can read it. I've got the screen that I'm going to read from here, and I actually can't see what the hell it says on there. But I can just about see that he says at that time, the field of ecology is chaos. Ecologists are not agreed even as to fundamental principles or motives. And I think that was probably a bit unkind, because there are two other quotes there at much the same time from two of the founding fathers of ecology, Frederick Clements in the States, and in fact Arthur Tansley giving his first presidential address to the beginnings of this society. And they seem pretty clear what ecology meant to them at that time. And it meant, to some extent, description of the outside world, but we get that theme really from Haeckel of the study of organisms in their natural environment. What's interesting perhaps around this time is how dominated the field was by vegetation biologists. They felt no compunction in describing ecology in terms of plants and vegetation as opposed to organisms. I think we would be more wary about doing that. But we begin to see around about that time a kind of a hardening of the edge of ecology as a science. And I want to take as my text for that, so to speak, my next local allusion, Charles Elton. There, as most people knew him, famous Oxford ecologist, the father of animal ecology, as he is often and quite rightly called, but in fact a Liverpudlian. There he is, a little bit younger, and that's him on his motorbike. Well, you can see he's on a motorbike. What you might not realise is that he's got his small mammal traps on the back there as he goes off trapping. And there he is again as an even younger man, and you might not recognize unless I tell you that that's him middle right, turning out for Liverpool College First 15. So he was a son of Liverpool, and those, and it'd be relatively few now, I suppose, who knew him as an older man, as an Oxford professor, or anyway, as a famous Oxford ecologist, I'm sure will attest to the fact that to his dying day, he was very self-evidently a Scouser. That's a joke, but lost on everybody who knew he was nothing of the sort. And if we look at his 1927 Animal Ecology, we can see that scientific edge very much in evidence. He describes it as scientific natural history, but perhaps more pertinently moves on to describing it as the sociology, and again we see this term, and economics of animals. He did acknowledge that it had been dominated by plant scientists and he was trying to redress the balance. And you can see from some of the chapter titles, chapters 3, 8, and 9 there of the book, the way in which he was now concentrating on the more quantitative aspects of the subject. And really over the next 50 years, the middle 50 years of ecology, that's how things went, with an increasing scientific bent to the point where we get here, for example, Odum, in his very famous and influential textbook, saying that we need to go beyond simply the study of interrelationships with, from his perspective, the study of the structure and function of ecosystems, that harder edge. And then Andrew Arthur, rather influentially, Australian ecologist, talking about the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms, which was something that Charlie Krebs then took up in his very famous and influential textbook, modified ever so slightly to talk about the scientific study of the interactions that determine the distribution and abundance of organisms. And then we, in our textbook, in what has always struck me as a move of amazing creativity and novelty, modified it again to talk about the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms and the interactions that determine distribution and abundance. But between them, those, in some sense, defined what the science had become, I would say, around about that time. But actually, I want to use our book, and there's John and Colin, and the first edition of, the first American edition of the book, to make actually a rather different point. In writing that first edition, we were, in some degree, at pains to minimize the amount of applied ecology that we included. We, I think, had some idea that we wanted to maintain the purity of ecology as a science. Now, I don't know whether that was defensible at the time, probably not looking back, but certainly it seemed less and less defensible as we produced further editions. And the inclusion of more and more applied ecology became a kind of a natural thing to do. And really, our position was indefensible because we had plenty of models that we could have looked to do something rather different. And here are two of them. Tony Bradshaw, who was professor of essentially ecology here at the University of Liverpool at the time when we were writing that book, and our own Georgina Mace, a Liverpool graduate. And both of them, Tony at that time, and I guess Georgina from that time up to the present, making it very plain that ecology was at one and the same time both an ecological science, but also a kind of a crisis discipline. And indeed, Charles Elton in 1927 talks about ecology being possibly the most important science for humanity. And so it seems to me that as we come to the present day, we very rightly should see ecology as having these dual meanings. On the one hand, the science underpinning what we do, but on the other hand, the crisis discipline, the applied science that is perhaps more important than any other to mankind going forward. And as I say, Tony and Georgina epitomise that. We were wrong, but perhaps have seen the error in our ways in realising that that is the case. And that, in some sense, then, is the present, but actually I want to go on and ask a little about the future, and really ask the question of whether ecology has a future, or whether its meaning will kind of disappear, whether ecology itself will become, in some sense, meaningless. Now, why would I be asking that question? And the answer is here. And the answer is that by almost common consent now, we're living in a so-called post-truth era in which public opinion is being swayed not by evidence or facts or, as we would like to see it, the truth, but by emotions, often manipulated emotions, by what people choose to believe is the truth, would like to believe is the truth. And this is true, we can see, in politics, it's true in economics, but it's also true in our own sphere as well, whether it be climate change or ecological issues more generally. Of course, we have had some successes as a community, but I suspect we all feel we have had too few successes and progress has been too slow and perhaps almost seems doomed to slow down even further. The sad thing is that this perhaps shouldn't surprise us. George LAKOFF, in this book and other things that he's written, argues that the problem really is that we ecologists, along with other scientists, along with other intellectuals, are still kind of hopelessly in love with the Enlightenment. We are in love with the environment, of course, but we're also hopelessly in love with the Enlightenment and kind of seduced by the power, as we see it, of rational thought. We kind of have it in our minds that when we're not getting through to people, as we clearly aren't, all we need to do is just explain it all one more time, put the facts before them just that little bit more clearly, and they will see the light. And in that, we are wrong. Because in the public sphere, that's not what wins arguments. What wins arguments is emotionally appealing arguments, arguments in which emotions are framed in metaphors that people already understand, messages that are kept simple and then repeated and repeated and repeated in an almost patronizing way, but that's what gets through. In the case of our own discipline, these are some of the things that LAKOFF himself suggests, that the metaphors that we have to fight are the conservative, the reactionary metaphors of nature, of the environment, as a resource, as property, as an adversary to be conquered. And as you can see, he suggests there promoting alternative metaphors. Now, I think the particular suggestions that he makes are not the point here. The point here is the more general principle that we have to learn the lesson that what's been going on is not somehow an inadequacy on our part in arguing effectively enough or convincingly enough. We've just been doing it in the wrong way. And so as we look to the future, and there's our future, one year down the line, that's that's where we'll be. Seems to me that we have a choice in this area. We can continue business as usual. We can continue to just maintain our integrity, to believe that rational thought will win through in the end. We can continue not to patronize the people that we're talking to. That's, I guess, how we'll see it. And if we do, we're going to lose. Or we can take the facts and use them as a kind of a moral justification for doing just what the other side are doing. Hone our emotionally attractive messages, effectively ditch the facts, in the public sphere anyway, keep it simple, say it again and again and again. Maybe ecology will not be meaningless after all. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that call to arms. I told you he was wise, didn't I? And that's a really fantastic introduction to our meeting and a real message that now is the time for learned societies to step up to that challenge. We also heard about our first president, Arthur Tansley, and our next lecture is named after him, the Tansley Lecture. And we've also spoken a lot already about the importance of international collaboration and those interactions. And it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our Tansley lecturer, Daniel Pauly. And Daniel is the epitome of those kind of values. He's both French and Canadian citizen who completed his high school and university studies in Germany. And after many years at the International Centre for Living Aquatic Resources Management in Manila in the Philippines, he became in 1994 a professor at the Fisheries Centre of the University of British Columbia. And since 1999, he's also been the principal investigator of the Sea Around Us, devoted to studying, documenting and mitigating the impact of industrial fishing on the world's marine ecosystems. And Daniel's going to talk to us about the ecology of fishing down marine food webs. Thank you, Daniel.
Good morning. You're going to get an example of crisis ecology that, of the crisis ecology that was briefly mentioned before. That is advancing the thing. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the oceans, and our main interaction with them is for transport of good and for extraction of life. We call it fishing, but we extract life out of the ocean and eat it. Now, the way we do that since the late 19th century is throwing fossil fuel at the fish, and therefore we can measure our impact or our effort in terms of the horsepower of the engines or the kilowatt hours of the engines that cumulatively are used for fishing. And you can see that this industrial might that we throw at fish is increasing rapidly and continues to do so. The result of it is that the fish, the catch that we extract out of the ocean is declining since it was increasing from the 50s to the 80s and to the 80s and stagnated for a while and is now decreasing since the mid-90s. The graph that you see is not the official graph that is reported by FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, but is based on reconstruction of 270 chunks of EZ and the open ocean that we did in a giant project that lasted a decade. And this was published in January to lots of media attention, and FAO is not happy about it, but the two findings from that study is that the ocean is more productive than we thought, much more, and we fish too much. That's obviously something we knew. The reason why there is a discrepancy is because the countries don't report all the catch they do, because they don't include discarded fish, they don't include artisanal fishing. For example, in Britain, every catch that is made from a boat of less than 10 meters is not recorded in statistics. So that's ridiculous, but it is the case for most countries that there's part of the fisheries that they don't report. So we reported everything, and that's what we got. Now, the response to all this fishing is that you get local depletions. Around the British Isles, this local depletion was noted 1 decade after the first trawlers were used. But this example is shown here. And these trawlers that I just mentioned, they had then to fish in the open North Sea, and then later all the way to Iceland, where they were beaten back, as you remember, in the Cod War. For Spain, for example, Britain has ceased to be a distant fishing nation, but Spain has not. And Spain was fishing in the 50s around Spain and around a little bit around Northwest Africa and around Canada. And this is where now it fished. Now, basically, all fishing nations do that. All great fishing nations, about 10 to 15. Japan, France, South Korea, especially China. And this is lead to an intense competition on the high seas and in the waters of countries that these boats operate. Now, all this fishing has impact, and there's different ways you can do that impact. You can do it either in depth, in a bay or in a gulf, and study in great detail at a small scale. If you want to do it on a global basis, you are stuck with unavailability of data, and we invented a method that was published in '98. This was Fishing Down Marine Food Web, and it was quite simple. The mean trophic level, the trophic level is defined as a position in a food web. And the position in a food web is dictated by the things you eat. And if you are a vegetarian, you have trophic level 2 because you eat things at trophic level 1. If you eat vegetarians, for example, you eat Bambi, then you have trophic level 3. If you eat lions that eat Bambi, you are a dragon, and you have trophic level 4. On land, you don't have many trophic levels. In the sea, you have lots of them, because essentially, predation is a question of size in the water, much more than on land. And so, if you know the mean trophic level of fish, you also know their size, and conversely. The trophic level of fish is studied via their food, to which a certain standard trophic level can be attributed, and their diet composition. And that is available, for example, in FishBase. This is a huge database that I helped initiate that has information on all fish of the world. And it's also available in a database of models of ecosystem, which also have trophic level. And we took this trophic level and the catch of fish and this simple equation that is simply the product of trophic level and catch weighted. The idea was that the catch is more or less representative of the biomass in a sea. You want to describe what happened in the sea, but you can see one in the catch. So the key finding was that there was, over time, a decline in the mean trophic level. And this decline is in the order of 0.05 to 0.1 trophic level per decade. Now, given that the fish we consume are between trophic level 3, that would be a sardine eating zooplankton that eat phytoplankton, and trophic level 4 to 4.5, that is a cod, fish and chips. There is no mean trophic level that we can eat. And this was alarming because when you go down the food web, you should catch more. And we are going down the food web, but the catches are stagnating. So, and at the time they were stagnating, now they're going down. So it doesn't work. And another conclusion is that fishing down occurs actually throughout the world, and catch and landing data can be used to demonstrate the existence of a process that happens at the level of ecosystem. And this graph, which one artist who works at Fishbase did for me, became a very useful graph. Many of you who work on the ocean will have seen it. So when you're lucky enough to have paper in science, people attach themselves to that paper because if they criticize it, they get also paper in science. So, yeah, actually the main author of that was running around FAO saying, "Do you want to join in?" I know that from a colleague who didn't join. Anyway, so this was the paper that criticized it, and the operation they did was include algae in a graph. If you include algae in a graph, you have more trophic levels on the Y scale, and then the change in trophic level become insignificant. You can do that. But more interesting were 4 points that these colleagues mentioned, which is the first, that the FAO data are too crude for anything to be said. This was funny because they are the one producing the FAO data. The second thing, landing or catch are not representative of the abundance in ecosystem. The third point is that trophic level change in the ontogeny of fish. And the fourth point is that bottom-up effects are not accounted for. For example, you can have primary production augmenting, then sardine and anchovies will increase, and this will reduce trophic level without the upper trophic level having changed. So I deal with this in great detail in a book called 5 Easy Pieces. This paper was one of the easy pieces. But here I give a summary of how we deal with that. The first thing is taxonomic over-aggregation. If you take the data from, for example, around Europe, most of the catches are reported at levels of species. And if you coarsen the data set by aggregating the species to genera, and the genera to families, and the families, and so on, all the way to international standard statistical groups, what you get is the signal is lost. If this is true, it means that the data of FAO, which are partly over-aggregated, because many countries report the data as families or as even higher group, it means that the signal in the FAO data is actually already masked, already coarsened. And if you detect a signal, in spite of that, then the signal is bigger, the effect is actually bigger than you think. This argument is, therefore, of taxonomic over-aggregation being a problem, is a judo argument. Judo argument was invented as a concept by the science fiction writer Asimov, Isaac Asimov. It's an argument that actually strengthens your case when you are done with it. The second, but actually over-aggregation can happen in space. The first in A is a time series in FAO of the trophic level in the western central Atlantic. And you can see nothing, or rather that the stuff increases. But actually, if you separate the Gulf of Mexico, the north of the Gulf of Mexico, which is the US, which began much earlier to overfish the water, and which have a shrimp fishery that annihilates everything that is not a shrimp, that is in the lower line in B, and the rest of the Western Central Atlantic, in which the fishery is still operate on fish, you can see that the two trends are very clear, but when you combine the data set, you get the picture in A. So taxonomic over-aggregation can actually occur and completely mask the fishing down effect. And we'll get back to this taxonomic over-aggregation. Now, the issues of the mean trophic level of catches not reflecting the mean trophic level of the biomass in the water, we dealt with in the Gulf of Thailand, as an example, with the Gulf of Thailand, which shows that the trawl survey, which is reflective of the biomass, and the catch essentially show the same trend. And we have other things that I will show you in a minute that shows that basically we are now fishing everything, the entire biomass that is in the ocean, except in the open ocean where lantern fish, myctophid, are not fished because we don't know how to concentrate them, because you have about 1 gram per cubic meter of water. But in the coast, we fish everything that is in the water. Now, ontogenic changes in trophic level cause the trophic level to go up. They don't simply change. Trophic level doesn't simply change. It goes up. A cod larvae, for example, is a zooplankton feeder when it is very small, and the zooplankton it eats is very small and is herbivorous. So they have trophic level 3, and then goes up as the larvae becomes a small fish that eats larger plankton, and then becomes a cod that eats fish. And that you can see in all species of fish. So what happens is if you have fish getting bigger, the trophic level goes up. If you use the same trophic level all the time, because you assume they have the same trophic level, you underestimate the effect of fishing down. Because with fishing effort increasing over time, you reduce the size. And if you reduce the size, you reduce the trophic level. So basically, from a line that goes like this, you should have a line that goes steeper. Another judo argument. You see the point. Finally, bottom-up effect. This is a representation of India, of Indian catches. And India has especially oil sardine. This is the bulk of the fishery, and there are lots of little fish that are caught demersally, caught by trawlers. And if you look at panel B, the picture in B, the mean trophic level down doesn't show anything. But if you eliminate the low trophic level from the graph, you see a clear signal, meaning indeed the variation of the sardine are so big that they mask the fishing down effect. So basically, you are better off eliminating the lower trophic level and showing the changes only for the hypertrophic level. Now, this fishing down here was reproduced in all Indian states, and always with the same result, that if you eliminate the lower trophic level, it gets very clear, the signal, that you are fishing down. Meaning, in India, they started having big fish, and then they fished so much that they ended up having small fish. Now, there is one person who will be mentioned later, one author, who thinks that fishing down is what appears to be the case, but actually what you do is, we have such terminology, you're fishing through. You're just adding new fish. For example, you fish cod and then you add sardine. That would decrease decrease the trophic level also, but the mean trophic level. But it's not the case here because you have eliminated the sardine throughout. So fishing through is not given. Also fishing through would add to the catch, and we know that the catch is going down. So overall, the 4 judo argument by FAO actually led to a research program which strengthened evidence for what is really shown as fishing down marine food web. In the following, I present some of this evidence that was published after this exchange occurred. And because the last part of my presentation is going to be contentious, I have to bore you with presenting the same thing again and again. So those of you who have drunk too much beer yesterday and want to sleep, about 10-minute nap is okay, because I now will present boring stuff. And basically, I will go to lots of countries and show you the same thing, that fishing down occurred. That's on the west coast of Canada, on the east coast of Canada. Here we try to account for the fact that cod became smaller. This is the mid-Atlantic coast of the US. Well, yes, that's enough. That is Cuba. That is in a favorite template. That is Uruguay. They almost picked at random. That is Peru. The change happened very fast when in the 50s they had a strong fishery for tuna, and it was completely overshadowed by a fishery for anchovy. That's fishing down. In Senegal, in Iceland. In Iceland, again, we took care of taking account of the reduction of size of cod, which is the major fish. And in Iceland, the fishing down started in 1910. Actually, in this long time series, you see an increase. That's because the fishery, before it was industrial, did catch lots of things like oysters and other bivalves, which are low in the food web. That is before the fishery industrialized. I'm talking about the change that happened after the fishery is industrialized. The Celtic Sea, that's the sea around here, and you can wake up again. It's done. There are lots of examples, and you can see them at fishingdown.org. I kind of put them as they appear in the literature. I put them there. This is so much, it occurs so much that the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, use the mean trophic level of the catch declining as an index of biodiversity. And it's called a marine trophic index, and countries are supposed to report on the marine trophic index. And some of them do. Even FAO has gotten into the act, but they could not call it fishing down. They call it assemblage overfishing. You can see that if you look at in in the 40s, you would have lots in a catch. You would have half of the catch would consist of very large fish and medium-sized fish. And the small fish were not were a smaller fraction of the catch. And if you look at now, the catch consists mainly of small fish, and medium-sized fish and large fish have disappeared. This is essentially the same thing, expressed differently. So let's look at some detail about what is it that happens when you fish down. At first, you have pristine ecosystem. So pristine ecosystem means you have abundant big fish, of high trophic level, and that includes turtles and things that eat jellyfish. You don't have many jellyfish around, and you don't have lots of small fish either, because they are eaten by the large predators. So you don't have a large population of these things, and you have clear waters. Basically because at the bottom of the sea, you have lots of consumers of algae, of the dead algae that fall on the ground. That's the reason why 100 years ago, the North Sea, for example, was described as very clear. And lots of water bodies which are now infernally turbid, like Chesapeake Bay or the North Sea, were described 100 years ago or more as clear. They had clear waters, essentially because the bottom was fixed by these things, which are not flowers. For our botanic friends, these are animals that are eating, well, you never know, that are eating marine snow. And these animals were in competition with polyps of marine jellyfish. Now, next, for pristine ecosystems, you can see them in the National Geographic Channel or BBC and on TV, but they have to go further and further to see them, right? And so I had no time to go there, and I don't have picture of one. The present ecosystem, how are they? We have at the present, we note a decline of high trophic level species. We still have some, and they are declining. And we have often in many ecosystems an increase of mid-trophic level species, and then we fish them out also. And we have lots of opportunistic species and weed species, if you like. But some of them, shrimp and crabs and squids and jellyfish, are valuable. Squids are very valuable, and they are weed species, but they are increasing throughout the world. But the fishers make good money on this. The same thing for shrimp, and jellyfish also are big fisheries, and they are exported, at least some of them, to China and other places in East Asia. And so the weed species are compensating for the loss of the large fish. If you look at it only economically, in economic terms, in ecological terms, you're talking about this disaster. Then we have a decline of benthos cover, no more flowers at the bottom, and no competition for the polyps. And then we have a localized transition to eutrophic areas by trawlers, generated by trawlers. Trawlers have become a geologic force. In the Mediterranean, the transport of mud that is caused by trawlers, that is loosened by trawlers and start moving around, is enormous, and it has become a geologic force. That's the reason why we talk about the Anthropocene, because we have influences that are marked, that will be marked in a geologic record. The future ecosystems, which we have now in many areas, because we live in the future in a sense, we have ecosystem dominated by large fish, or by small fish, and invertebrate, notably jellyfish. We have a resuspension of sediments, by storm and bottom trawling. Basically, because the bottom is not fixed, it is resuspended by trawling and any storm. This causes enormous primary production and a plankton community that is very unstable and which can be easily invaded by harmful algal bloom, of which we have lots of them and increasingly so. And we have benthic processes dominated by anoxic event, that is dead zone, and of which we have about 500 that are throughout the world. The Gulf of Mexico is in one, where there is no oxygen for several months, and then this grow. The Baltic Sea is a big anoxic zone, the central Baltic Sea, the central Black Sea, that is favored by fresh water that covers the salt water. But we have also created a dead zone in different parts of the world that are spreading. There are 500, and you can, if you write dead zone and the name is Diaz, D-I-A-Z, that's the scientist in the US that monitors them, they can become the future of the ocean. And this is the future ecosystem, but also the present in many areas. And to give you an idea of what it can become, or what it is, that is what you catch in China with trawlers in coastal areas. That resembles nothing like fisheries, but that's what they catch. And this is not a problem for China, because this stuff can be used for aquaculture. It is a mixture of small fish and jellyfish and plankton. And that slop is fed into aquaculture. Much of the catch of China is that, the coastal catch, by trawlers. It is difficult to imagine, but it is the case. That's what we have reduced the ocean to. Now, what I've presented to you is a research program that goes on, and I work with my colleagues and stuff. And then I wake up to this. So fishing down does not happen. It's debunked. It is all a fraud. It's all an illusion. It doesn't happen. Now, I will talk about the paper that caused this uproar was published in 2010. It's not because I'm upset about it, but because it can happen to any of you that you publish something and you're very confident, and then you wake up and then this happens. That's the reason why it was not a good idea to sleep 10 minutes ago, because I did present evidence, a lot of it, and I could present more and more and more and more. And here, this is Ray Hilborn is a major fishery scientist, also known as industry hack, but he talks about the arrogance of claiming something for which there is no evidence. And I have presented you lots of evidence. Now, why was this taken seriously? For example, a good colleague of us and him presented evidence which has nothing to do with present-day fisheries of studying middens, showing that the Indians of Maine, of what is now Maine, were operating at trophic level 3.2 to 3.3. Then the fishery devastated all of this cod and other big fish. And then they had a sea urchin fishery, a sea cucumber fishery, and then a seaweed fishery. In the Gulf of Maine, there is nothing else but lobster to exploit. And the lobster are not a fishery, because they are fed in traps with herring that are imported from New Zealand. So basically, the lobster fishery is a fed fishery because the small lobster get in the traps, eat the bait, and get out. 96% of the food is of the traps bait is consumed by lobsters. So in the Gulf of Maine, this fishing down happened without me being involved. The Gulf of Thailand, which I presented before, one author noticed that before industrial fishery began, they were fishing shrimp and mussel coastally. But obviously fishing down operates only from the moment you have industrial fishing. And if you consider before industrial fishing, the fishery operated at low trophic level, then went up, and then went down. If you consider this to be the trajectory, obviously it went up and went down. But if you consider only industrial fishing, it went down. In fact, that's what happened in the Gulf of Thailand. From the moment trawling was involved, the catch per effort, that is the abundance of fish, went down, and the catch stabilized at this level. It is now around 20 kilogram per hour. It was 300 kilogram per hour. It's more than one of the magnitude decline in the biomass, and obviously the fish have become smaller. As a young man I was working in Indonesia in '75 to introduce trawling in Indonesia because it was so successful in Thailand. That's being part of the problem. So declining trophic level of fishery landing is because we have new fisheries developing. I mentioned before that if you cut the fish at lower trophic level, you still get this effect. You can see that in Greek fisheries, for example, if you slice the catches by trophic level, the upper trophic level decline and the lowest trophic level don't. And also, if the trophic level decline because of addition of low trophic level species, if that were the case, then altogether there would be an increasing catch, but the catch of the world is decreasing. So in nature, they found that nature, when something's published in Nature, it's true, right? Most of the case, but in this one, it was not. So in Scientific American, the mean trophic level was decreasing, and now it's not anymore. So that is what the central piece of evidence that was shown. If you include all trophic levels, you get trends that look like that. If you include the trophic level up to from 3.5 up, there is a decline. Well, that is not evidence that there is no decline in trophic level, because there is, in the upper part there is a decline in trophic level. But why does it behave like this? Why, if you include all trophic level, do you have an apparent increase? And that was, for a short time, a question that I asked myself. And it's actually very easy to understand. Imagine you have, that's the Gulf of Thailand. You have people fishing little fish and small catch, and that is sustainable. That has been going on hundreds of years. And then we come and add a trawler. And we fish down this food web, and we increase the catch. At some point, the food web is kaput, the biomass is down. What do? We go fish offshore. We go fish further offshore. And then we go fish the next one, and so on. And if you want to calculate the productivity of a field, of a potato field, you ask Farmer Smith, I produce, do you measure things in acres? I have 100 acres, and I produce 15 tons of potatoes. And then he produced 30 tons of potatoes, and you say well, the productivity has increased. No, the size of the farm has increased. You obviously have, when you make comparison, to standardize things for the size of the farm. And therefore, you have to standardize the fishing down that happens here and not include the fish that are here. Because if you are down the food web here and you go there, you will start again having big fish. And then you have fishing down coastally, and then you have a big fish because you move out. And there is a way to get this thing sorted out, and this is now getting a bit complicated. If you include all trophic level, you see that inshore, that is distance from the coast, and that's latitude. In the northern world, in the northern part of the world, where fishery is developed, we have fishing down, blue. But as we move further offshore, it seems to increase. And that is the case also for the southern hemisphere, where fisheries develop later. If, however, we include only fish up to, we eliminate the small fish, we see that we have fishing down everywhere, except in those areas where we just begun to move in. Another way to present it is this. Basically, we have developed a technique to separate those pyramids out. And you can see, for example, for China, inshore, the coastal fishery having a decline, and then at some point it began operating there. And this work that enabled also comparing the different masking effects. When you aggregate to family level, you mask a little bit. When you aggregate to order level, you lose the information that I've shown you there. When you don't consider size changes, you have a little masking effect. But if you don't consider the offshore movement, in other words, the increase of the farm size, you get a big effect. So basically, fishing down can be seriously masked by fisheries moving down and catching big fish. So I will skip that one. And we have built in this routine in our website, where you can get the catches and the reconstructed catches and the trend of trophic level for all countries. This is for the world as a whole, the trophic level going down, and then having a little upswing. And this is the deconstruction of this, showing that indeed we are fishing down. And we are both fishing down and moving out. So what happened with this paper? Well, the 98 papers continues to be well cited, and my non-friends had a study. They hide behind a student here that was made to do the study. She had to work 7 papers, look at how they were cited, given that they were refuted. And they were refuted by these papers. You see the caddy For example, the Caddy et al. Method, there was a refutation. I talked about that, these 4 points, and there are other papers that criticize it. And according to them, the moment somebody criticizes you, your paper becomes invalid, right? Refutation, you're refuted, and you should science is self-correcting, you should go home and forget about what you have done the last 20 years. But, and all these papers behave like that. They have less citation than predicted given the refutation, that is the interpretation, except that one, except the fishing down paper. And they're quite unhappy about that, but there's nothing they can do about it. People continue to cite the fishing down paper. Why? Well, when you have, and I'm almost finished, when you present, what is a discovery, actually? What is a scientific advance? Basically, you have new fact and explanation and an observation, and you can relate them to existing knowledge. You observe something, and it makes sense in terms of existing knowledge. If you have observation, for example, that the alien landed on your garden, you're going to have difficulty relating that to existing knowledge. If the alien, however, burn up the place and can be photographed and can be seen, that can be related to existing knowledge. The second thing, they should also, if a new discovery or scientific advance should explain better the fact that we already knew. If the new observation that are generated by a new research program, they cannot be completely new. The research program also utilizes other facts that are already known, but it should explain them better. If it doesn't, it cannot pretend that they don't exist. So you have to explain better the fact that are already there, and you also explain the new things that you have. So this paper that says there is no fishing down in the world, what actually did it present that was new? What process, ecological process, if not fishing down, which is due to the fact that big fish are more sensitive to fishing than small ones, would generate the observed pattern on such a gigantic scale, as observed by independent scientists. And so what is the alternative explanation for the occurrence of this trend? Because in the paper that you can read, it is stated that this trend do not exist. And the last thing is the notion that we are not fishing down, compatible with what we know about historical ecology and the history of fisheries. So that is the kind of thing where we left. Obviously, this is an example of a controversy that exists in fisheries and in ecology. I have been partisan, obviously. I have been partisan, but I think I can rest my case because this four question is important. When you have facts, you have to explain them, and you have also to explain why the alternative explanation is wrong. And if you don't do that, you are just doing propaganda. Thank you very much. How are we doing with the time?
We're doing fine. We're doing fine. I've got some questions. Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Wall. I'm one of the two newest honorary members of the British Ecological Society. And one of my tasks is to thank Daniel for this really invigorating talk. I don't think we've seen anything in the Tansley lecture where it comes out, here is why ecology is relevant trophic groups, food webs, interactions. Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. We have a lot of questions, and they come in by Twitter. And so I'm hopeful that you'll answer some of these. I'm not going to give you a list. I'm going to be a little picky. And so one of the ones I have, just because my research is in Antarctica, is there's a commission on marine Antarctic reserves or something like that, CAMLR.
Yeah, CAMLR.
Yes, and I'd like for you to, if you could, comment in general on how well protected areas such as this new, very large, pristine area where they've been fishing. Yes.
In fact, large marine protected areas are the only way we can keep some of the big animals alive. If you take one extremely stupid fish, the one that, not in Antarctica,
no.
The one that the sawfish that grew itself a snout that has these teeth, and basically it gets entangled in any gear. Any gear that you can imagine, it will entangle itself. There is the species, and there are several species of it, Pristis, will not survive any fishery, even a very small fishery. If we want to have sawfish in ecosystem on this planet, there must be larger areas where there is no fishing. Now, getting to the Ross Sea, in the Ross Sea, there are lots of animals with large ranges, with trophic interaction that involves lots of other animals that move and stuff. These animals would never survive intense fishery on krill, because the whole food chain depends on krill. And protecting this, the Ross Sea and other large marine ecosystem is the only way to keep them intact. Because if any fishery, even a small controlled fishery, will immediately reduce the abundance of very large fish and very large animals. So, and they structured the ecosystem. So an ecosystem that lacks the big fish or the big animals is fundamentally different. So you need large marine reserves. And Ross Sea is a triumph in that regard.
I would just add that it has taken a number of years to get that far, so these things don't happen quickly. Let me go to the questions here. One that comes from the British Ecological Society, 2016, is, are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not, but no, I'm not. No, I'm not. But my only excuse is I'm 70, and I'm not opposed to young people doing things better than...
Here's one from @Dan Beber, wondering how a fish can be trophic level 3.2.
Okay. A fish can be trophic level 3.2 by consuming plankton, herbivorous zooplankton, by a certain fraction, and 80%, and 20% consuming things that are trophic level 2. Trophic level 3. Basically, if you eat herbivorous zooplankton and carnivorous zooplankton, which can be of similar size, you have a trophic level bigger than 3, right? And the fraction then of carnivorous zooplankton in that diet needs to be only 20% in that diet to elevate your trophic level from 3 to 3.2. So basically, it's very simple. You take the trophic level of an animal, the fraction in a diet, and you add up to 1, and you end up with a fractional trophic level, which was, by the way, invented by Odum, that we saw a picture of. Fractional trophic level turn trophic level from an ideal construct, a conceptual construct, into a tool that could be used. Fractional trophic level, yeah.
Here's one from @PT98765. Is it not more appropriate to use a diversity index than a simple mean trophic level? Does the same pattern emerge?
My point is, I don't know if the same pattern would emerge, but that's not the point. Indicators, to me, are never used instead of. They are always used together. No indicator can claim to be panacea, to be something that can help in all situations. And the more indicators you have, the better you can identify what your system is. Because your system is going to be infinitely complicated, infinitely complex. And so one indicator is certainly not going to capture its essence. Neither will 20 indicators, but 20 indicators can give you a more balanced figures. And so I would never propose the mean trophic level as an alternative indicator. It's always an additional thing that you can use to identify the status of your ecosystem.
Okay, here's one from @Sarah and it's, how effective do you think sustainable fishing labels are, for example, MSC Eco Label? What can we do to improve?
Yeah. So, dumping on the MSC in Britain is a big deal because it was born here. The MSC was born of an alliance between WWF and Unilever as a bridge between two opposite worlds, one or not world that were usually not collaborating well, the world of conservation and the business world. It was meant to be a bridge between the two. And I was participating in the effort to launch it, and I was in Westminster Parliament when we launched it, and on TV and everything. And I've been for years an ardent supporter of the MSC. The MSC, however, went on to certify as sustainable a bunch of fisheries that were not sustainable. And the friend of the MSC fell off. The MSC, so to say, fell off gradually. One more outrageous fishery was certified after the other. Trawl fisheries were certified, reduction fisheries, fishmeal fisheries, the krill fishery in Antarctica, everything gets certified. And a week ago, a document was leaked 2 weeks ago that WWF, the mother of the MSC, was outraged and about the motivation structure that the MSC has, the incentive structure, which is it financially benefits from more certification. And this very morning, when I was looking at my email, I learned that the Atlantic orange ruffy fishery in New Zealand has been certified. Now, the trawl fishery in New Zealand is run by a bunch of gangsters, and if you don't believe me, read the press about New Zealand fisheries. And orange ruffy is a fish that gets 150-year-old. And there is a good an ecologist that says, don't eat anything that is older than your grandmother. And so having an orange ruffy fishery sustainable is kind of a contradiction in term, because, again, industrial might thrown at things that grow that slowly, in all cases, means that that thing will be disappeared within a decade. So the MSC is certifying fisheries that are not sustainable as sustainable. It's engaged in large deception scheme, I'm afraid.
I think yes, we will have to stop now, but I think over tea, there's lots of things we could talk to Daniel about. I want to thank you once again on behalf of the British Ecological Society.